A flash drive arrived at Kensington Palace this morning, left in a plain envelope on William's private desk with no return address. The files inside revealed a meticulously documented strategy Meghan has been executing for 18 months. One that targets William's children specifically. His response, delivered within 3 hours, has already set events in motion that will change the Sussex situation forever. The flash drive that exposed everything. William found the envelope when he arrived at his office at 7:53 earlier than his usual schedule, but typical for a man whose responsibilities rarely allowed for leisurely mornings. The envelope was cream-cold on expensive paper stock and bore no markings except his name written in block capitals across the front. His private secretary hadn't seen who delivered it. Security footage from the corridor showed nothing unusual. Someone with access to palace interiors had left it deliberately positioned where William couldn't miss it. He opened it carefully. The instincts of someone who'd spent a lifetime in security-conscious environments making him cautious about unexpected items. Inside was a single black unmarked flash drive and a handwritten note on matching cream paper. The note contained one sentence. "You need to know what she's been planning for your children." No signature, no explanation, just that single chilling statement. William's first call was to palace security. The flash drive would need to be scanned for malware and checked for any digital threats before being opened on any palace system. The security scan took 40 minutes. No viruses, malicious code, or anything that would compromise the palace systems. Just a collection of files meticulously organized into folders with dates and subject headings. The folder was titled Media Strategy George 18+ and contained dozens of documents. One of such emails, dated 7 months ago, was particularly explicit, where Meghan had written to a senior editor at a major American publication saying when George is old enough to have his own voice, he'll need people he can trust to tell his story without palace filters. Building that relationship now, even at a distance, ensures he knows I'm an option when he's ready to speak his truth. William read that exchange 3 times, each reading making the implications more transparent and more disturbing. Meghan wasn't just planning to give interviews about the royal family. She was actively strategizing how to cultivate direct relationships with his children, positioning herself as an alternative confidant who could provide them with media platforms when they were old enough to rebel against palace constraints potentially. The second folder was labeled Charlotte Outreach 12-6 and contained a different but equally calculated strategy. The third folder focused on Lucy and was less developed, reflecting his younger age, but showed similar strategic thinking about future access and influence. What became clear across all 3 folders was that Meghan wasn't engaging in casual speculation about William's children. She was executing a long-term plan to position herself as an alternative authority figure, someone they might turn to as they grew older, particularly if they experienced the kind of tensions with palace life that Harry had. But the most damning folder was labeled simply Implementation Timeline, and showed that this wasn't theoretical future planning. Steps were already being taken. Meghan had been working with a California-based public relations firm specializing in relationship management and strategic positioning with high-value individuals. There were expenses documented for monitoring services that tracked William's children's public appearances and extracted information from social media accounts of their schoolmates' parents. William felt physically ill reading through the documents. This wasn't a typical Sussex drama or another round of media complaints about the institution. This was something far more invasive and calculated. Meghan had been treating his children as targets in a strategic operation, gathering intelligence on them, planning future approaches to them, and preparing to insert herself into their lives at moments when they might be most vulnerable to outside influence. William sat back from his computer, his hands shaking slightly with a rage he rarely allowed himself to feel. He had tolerated years of Sussex attacks on the institution, had endured countless media stories painting him as cold or controlling, and had watched his brother be manipulated into estrangement. But this, planning to target his children to gather intelligence on them to position for future exploitation of their potential vulnerabilities. This crossed a line so far beyond previous conflicts that it entered entirely different territory. He reached for his phone and made 3 calls in rapid succession. First to Catherine, second to his private secretary, and third to Princess Anne, asking her to make herself available within the hour. As he waited for them to arrive, William went through the flash drive again, this time taking notes, documenting the most damaging evidence, preparing to make decisions he knew would be irrevocable. By 9:45, when Catherine arrived looking concerned, and followed 15 minutes later with her characteristic brisk efficiency, William had made his decision, and he was about to show her exactly how a future king responds when someone threatens the people he's sworn to protect above all else. The strategy targeting George, Charlotte, and Louis. The depth and sophistication of Meghan's planning became more apparent as William, Catherine, and reviewed the contents of the flash drive in full. The documents showed that Meghan's strategy had been developed with input from child psychologists, media consultants, and individuals experienced in what the files called high-value relationship cultivation with restricted access subjects. The language was clinical, almost corporate, treating William's children not as family members but as targets in a strategic operation requiring careful planning and patient execution. The George-focused materials were the most extensive, reflecting his position as the future king and therefore the highest value target for anyone seeking to influence the next generation of the monarchy. For each stage, Meghan's team had prepared response strategies. If George showed signs of struggling with his role, there were plans for how Meghan could position herself through intermediaries as someone who understood the burden of royal expectations and could offer a perspective his parents couldn't. If he developed interests that conflicted with palace approval, there were strategies for how Meghan could publicly support those interests, building rapport and gratitude. If he experienced any kind of personal crisis, relationship difficulty, or public mistake, there were prepared approaches for how Meghan could reach out with support that would create emotional debt and future access. The Charlotte materials reflected a different but equally calculated approach. The psychological profiling based on Charlotte's observed personality traits and public appearances suggested she would be more family-oriented than George, less likely to rebel openly, but potentially vulnerable to feeling overshadowed by her older brother's status. Meghan's strategy focused on building a stronger relationship with Charlotte around being the spare and understanding the unique challenges of being important but not central. Several documents discussed how Meghan could position herself as a mentor figure for Charlotte, someone who had experienced similar dynamics in her own family and could provide guidance. There were plans for how to create opportunities for connection, potentially through charitable work or public advocacy on issues Charlotte cared about that would allow Meghan to build rapport while appearing supportive rather than manipulative. The goal explicitly stated in multiple files was to ensure Charlotte viewed Meghan as an ally and confidant by the time she reached her teenage years. The Lizzie materials were less developed, acknowledging that he was still too young for detailed strategic planning, but they showed the same fundamental approach. There was also a note suggesting that Lizzie, as the youngest and most removed from direct succession pressure, might be the easiest access point if the approaches to George and Charlotte encountered resistance. But what made all of this truly sinister was the surveillance infrastructure Meghan had apparently established to gather the information feeding these strategies. The flash drive contained evidence of a network of paid informants providing regular updates on the Wales children. Some were former palace staff who had left service but maintained contact with current employees. Others were parents at Lamrock School who had cultivated friendships with other families and reported back on information gleaned from casual conversations. One individual identified in the files only as Source 7 had been paid nearly £40,000 over 18 months to provide detailed monthly reports on the Wales children's activities, behaviors, and any comments made by William or Catherine about parenting challenges or family dynamics. The monitoring extended to social media as well. And while George, Charlotte, and Louis had no personal social media accounts, their schoolmates and the children of family friends did. Meghan's team had been systematically monitoring these accounts, using sophisticated tools to identify posts that mentioned or depicted the Wales children, and extracting information about their activities, friendships, and interests that wasn't visible in palace communications. There were also files showing Meghan had been tracking William and Catherine's parenting decisions, looking for patterns or approaches that might create future tensions with the children. Decisions about schooling, about how much independence to allow, about media exposure, all were being documented and analyzed for potential pressure points. One memo suggested that if William and Catherine maintained strict control over the children's public presence into their teenage years, it would create precisely the kind of resentment Meghan could exploit by offering alternative paths to public expression. What Catherine found most disturbing was a folder containing psychological profiles of each child written by someone claiming expertise in child development and family dynamics. The profiles went beyond simple personality descriptions to identify specific vulnerabilities, insecurities, and pressure points that could be exploited to build rapport or create dependency on alternative authority figures. It reads like an intelligence agency targeting analysis, not family relationship planning. As the three of them sat in William's office, the flash drive's contents displayed across multiple screens, and the magnitude of what they were facing became clear. This wasn't a problem that could be managed through careful diplomacy or quiet family conversations. However, the question now was what to do about it. And William, looking at profiles of his children written like intelligence targets, at strategies for exploiting their future vulnerabilities, at evidence of 18 months of surveillance he'd never detected, knew that his response would need to be equally systematic, equally comprehensive, and utterly without mercy. Catherine's discovery weeks earlier. What William didn't know as he reviewed the flash drive's devastating contents was that Catherine had been tracking suspicious patterns in their children's behavior for nearly 6 weeks. It had started in late October when Charlotte came home from school and mentioned that one of her classmates' mothers had asked particular questions about what the Wales family was planning for Christmas. The questions, Charlotte said, had felt strange, too detailed and persistent, focusing on exactly where they'd be and who would be present. But then George had mentioned a similar conversation. A parent at a school sports event asking about William's schedule and whether the family found it hard when he was away on official duties. Again, individually innocent, but the specificity and the fact that it happened twice within a week made Catherine's instincts prickle. The third incident had been more concerning as Catherine's personal protection officer had flagged an individual who had been photographed near Adelaide Cottage on 3 separate occasions over 2 weeks, always with plausible reasons, walking a dog or jogging, but whose presence felt deliberate rather than coincidental. When the protection officer ran a discreet background check, the individual turned out to be a private investigator who specialized in what their website called discrete information services. That discovery transformed Catherine's vague concern into an active alarm. She hadn't told William immediately because she needed more than suspicions and a private investigator who might be in Windsor for entirely unrelated reasons. Instead, she had reached out to someone she'd worked with before, a former MI5 officer who now ran a private security consulting firm serving high net worth individuals and corporations needing discreet investigative services. The brief Catherine gave was simple. Determine whether anyone was actively gathering information about her children. Identify who was behind it, and if so, document everything with evidence that could support action if needed. The investigation had taken 3 weeks and had uncovered far more than Catherine had anticipated. The former MI5 officer, using contacts in both private security and law enforcement communities, had identified at least 5 individuals who appeared to be gathering information on the Wales family with particular focus on the children. But the investigator was unable to access the full scope of what Meghan was planning or the information already gathered. They could prove surveillance was happening and could trace it back to Meghan's team, but they couldn't document the strategic planning or the ultimate purpose beyond general intelligence gathering. The evidence was strong enough to confirm Catherine's worst fears, but not comprehensive enough to understand what they were facing fully.